The helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and debris, the rotors slicing through the hot Afghan air like angry blades. Master Chief Petty Officer James Ghost Harrison was the first one out, his boots hitting the cracked earth as he scanned the compound ahead. 17 years in the Navy SEALs had taught him to read a situation in seconds. The silence, the scattered belongings, the door hanging off its hinges. Something was wrong. The village of Karabagh sat nestled in a valley between two mountain ridges, a cluster of mud brick homes that had stood for generations. Once it had been a thriving community of farmers and craftsmen, families who had lived and died on this land for centuries. Now it was a ghost town, its streets empty, its windows dark, its soul ripped away by the violence that had swept through it just hours before. James had seen villages like this before, too many of them. Each one left a scar on his conscience, a reminder of the cost of war that no medal or commendation could erase. "Ghost, we've got movement," whispered Rodriguez, his second-in-command, gesturing toward a collapsed structure on the eastern edge of the village. James raised his fist, signaling the team to hold. The mission was supposed to be simple: extract a high-value informant and his family before enemy forces arrived. But the intelligence had been wrong. They were too late. The village had already been hit. He surveyed his team. 6 men, each one a brother, each one willing to die for the others. They had been through countless missions together, had bled together, had buried friends together. And yet, no matter how many times James did this, it never got easier. They moved through the destruction methodically, checking each structure for survivors or threats. The informant's house was a pile of rubble, smoke still rising from the debris. James felt his jaw tighten. Another failure, another family they couldn't save. He thought about the informant, a man named Abdul Rashid, who had risked everything to help American forces. Abdul had believed in a better future for his country, had believed that the sacrifices he made would lead to peace for his children and grandchildren. Now he was dead, buried under the same rubble as his dreams. "Chief," Rodriguez's voice came through the comms, strained in a way James had never heard before. "You need to see this." James found him standing at the entrance of what had once been a small storage building. Inside, huddled in the corner behind a pile of grain sacks, was a child, a girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Her clothes were torn and covered in dust, her dark hair matted with dirt and what might have been blood. But her eyes were what stopped James cold. They were the color of honey, too large for her thin face, and they held a look he had seen too many times before. The look of someone who had seen too much. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at him with those ancient eyes, her small body pressed against the wall as if she could disappear into it. James slowly lowered his weapon and removed his helmet. He crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. He had 3 nieces back home, girls he had bounced on his knee and read bedtime stories to. Looking at this child, he thought of them, thought of how lucky they were to grow up in a world where war was something on television, not something that destroyed your home and killed your family. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't move, didn't blink. "Rodriguez, get me some water and whatever rations we have." James stayed where he was, not approaching, just present. He'd learned over the years that with children, patience was everything. You couldn't force trust. You had to earn it. "My name is James," he said, tapping his chest. "James, what's your name?" Nothing, just those eyes, watching, waiting. He thought about what she must have witnessed, the sound of explosions, the screams of her family, the sight of everything she knew being destroyed. She had survived by hiding, by making herself small and silent, by becoming invisible. It was a survival instinct that had saved her life and would take years to unlearn. Rodriguez returned with a canteen and a protein bar. James took them and slowly extended his hand, placing them on the ground between himself and the girl. "Water," he said, pointing to the canteen. "Food. For you." For a long moment nothing happened. Then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the girl's gaze shifted to the offerings. Her tongue darted out to wet her cracked lips. "It's okay," James said. "Take it!" She moved like a wild animal, quick and desperate, snatching the canteen and retreating to her corner. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, her eyes never leaving James. "Ghost! We need to move," came the voice through his comms. "Enemy forces 20 minutes out." James didn't respond. He watched the girl drain the canteen, watched her tear into the protein bar with her teeth. When had she last eaten? Days, maybe. The informant and his family had been targeted specifically. This child had survived only by hiding. "What's your name?" he asked again. The girl finished eating and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Then in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, "Amira." "Amira?" James smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. "That's a beautiful name. It means princess, doesn't it?" The girl looked at him with surprise, as if shocked that this foreign soldier knew the meaning of her name. "My grandmother told me," Amira whispered. "She said I was her little princess. Where is your grandmother now?" Amira's face crumpled, and for a moment James thought she was going to cry. But she held it together, that same survival instinct kicking in, pushing down the grief, because grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Gone," she said simply. "Everyone is gone." James felt something break inside him. In 17 years of service he had seen unspeakable horrors. He had lost friends, had taken lives, had done things that would haunt him until his dying day. But nothing hurt as much as seeing this child, this innocent girl, carrying a weight that no one should ever have to carry. "Ghost, we have to go. Now!" James stood slowly, extending his hand toward the girl. "Amira, I need you to come with me. It's not safe here. I'm going to take you somewhere safe." The girl looked at his hand like it was a weapon. She shook her head frantically, pressing herself further into the corner. "I know you're scared. I know you don't know me, but if you stay here, bad people will come, people who will hurt you." He kept his hand extended, his voice steady. "I promise you, Amira, I will keep you safe. I will not let anything happen to you." She stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, her palm clammy with fear. But she held on, and James made a promise to himself in that moment, a promise he would spend the next 15 years trying to keep. He would save this child, whatever it took. The extraction was chaos. Enemy forces arrived sooner than expected, and James found himself running through the village with Amira in his arms, bullets kicking up dust around them. She didn't scream. She just buried her face in his chest and held on with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so small. Rodriguez laid down covering fire while the rest of the team leapfrogged toward the extraction point. James could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s, the deeper thump of their own weapons responding. It was a symphony he knew by heart, a deadly orchestra of war. "Keep your head down, Amira," he said, though he doubted she understood the words. "I've got you. I've got you." A bullet whizzed past his ear, close enough that he could feel the displaced air. He ducked behind a crumbling wall, checking on Amira. She was trembling but silent, her fingers clutching his vest with white-knuckled intensity. 30 seconds to the bird," Rodriguez called out. "Go, go, go!" James ran. He ran like he'd never run before, his legs pumping, his lungs burning, his arms wrapped protectively around the small body, pressed against his chest. The helicopter was ahead, its rotors spinning, the crew chief waving them forward. They made it to the helicopter with seconds to spare. As they lifted off, James looked down at the burning village, at the life this girl had known disappearing beneath them. She was watching too, her face pressed against the window, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I'm sorry," James whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to himself. "I'm so sorry." The flight back to base was quiet. The team sat in exhausted silence, processing another mission, another brush with death. But James couldn't stop looking at the girl in his arms. She had fallen asleep somewhere over the mountains, her body finally giving in to exhaustion now that she felt safe enough to let go. Rodriguez moved to sit beside him, his voice low enough that only James could hear. "What happens to her now?" Rodriguez asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. James didn't have an answer. Standard protocol was clear. Civilians rescued during operations were processed, documented, and handed over to the appropriate agencies. For a child like Amira, that meant an orphanage, or if she was lucky, a refugee camp where she might eventually be placed with distant relatives. But something in James resisted that. This girl had already lost everything. He couldn't just hand her off to a system that would see her as a number, a problem to be processed. "I'm going to figure something out," he said, more to himself than to Rodriguez. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "You know, Chief, I've seen you do a lot of impossible things. If anyone can figure this out, it's you." "Thanks, Rodriguez. Just be careful. Don't make promises you can't keep." James looked down at Amira's sleeping face, at the tracks of tears that had dried on her dusty cheeks. "I never do," he said. When they landed at the base, James carried Amira to the medical tent himself. She woke during the transfer, her eyes snapping open with panic before settling on his face. She relaxed then, just slightly, recognizing him. "It's okay," he said. "We're at the base. There are doctors here who are going to make sure you're healthy. I'll be right outside." She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Don't leave." "I'm not leaving, I promise." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Finally, she nodded and released her grip. The medical examination revealed what James had feared. Minor cuts and bruises, severe dehydration and malnourishment, but otherwise physically unharmed. The miracle of that wasn't lost on anyone. "She's going to be okay," the medic said. "Physically, at least. Psychologically, and that's going to take time, probably years." James nodded. "Where will she go?" "There's a processing center in Kabul. They'll take her there, try to locate any surviving family members. If they can't find anyone, she'll be placed in an orphanage." "How long?" "Could be weeks, could be months. You know how these things work." James did know. He'd seen it before. Children lost in the system, forgotten, eventually aging out with no education, no support, no future. He'd seen them on the streets of Kabul, begging for scraps, their eyes empty of hope. He couldn't let that happen to Amira. "I want updates," he said. "On her case. On where she ends up." The medic raised an eyebrow. "That's not really protocol, Chief." "I'm making it protocol." The medic looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Before Amira was taken away, James went to see her. She was sitting on a cot, wrapped in a blanket that dwarfed her small frame, a cup of soup clutched in her hands. When she saw him, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "Amira!" He crouched down in front of her, just like he had in that storage building. "I have to go now. There are other people who need my help, but I want you to know something." She looked at him with those honey-colored eyes, waiting. "I'm going to come back for you. I don't know when, and I don't know how, but I promise, I will come back, and I will make sure you're safe. Do you understand?" She didn't answer, but she reached out and touched his face, her small fingers tracing the line of his jaw as if memorizing him. "Promise?" she asked, the English word foreign on her tongue, but clear in its meaning. "I promise," he said again. "I promise, on my life." And then she was gone, carried away by a medic to a transport that would take her to Kabul, to a system that saw her as just another casualty of war. James watched the vehicle disappear into the dust, and he felt something shift in his chest. He had made promises before, to his country, to his team, to himself, but this one felt different. This one felt like the most important promise he would ever make. 3 months later, James was back in Virginia Beach, trying to readjust to civilian life during his leave. His wife, Sarah, could tell something was different about him. After 17 years of marriage to a seal, she had learned to read the silences, the moments when he would stare out the window at nothing, lost in memories he couldn't share. Sarah was a remarkable woman. She had met James when they were both 22. He, a fresh-faced recruit, just starting his journey toward the Trident. She, a nurse at the base hospital, who had seen too many broken soldiers to have any illusions about military life. They had fallen in love despite the odds, had built a life together despite the deployments and the secrets and the constant fear that one day he wouldn't come home. She had learned early on not to ask too many questions about his work. The missions were classified, the operations secret, the trauma hidden behind a wall of professionalism and duty. But she could see the cost. She saw it in the way he sometimes woke up shouting, in the way he scanned every room for exits, in the way he held her a little too tight, as if afraid she might disappear. "You're thinking about her again," Sarah said one evening, sitting beside him on the porch. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but James barely noticed. "The girl," James nodded. He had told Sarah about Amira, as much as he could without violating operational security. He told her about the eyes, the silence, the way she had reached out and touched his face. "I got an update today," he said. "She's still in the orphanage. They couldn't find any surviving relatives. No one has claimed her." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "What's the orphanage like?" "Overcrowded, underfunded. The staff does their best, but there are too many kids and not enough resources. She sleeps in a room with 20 other children. She's not learning to read. She's not going to school." James's voice was bitter. "She's just existing, waiting for something that will probably never come." "James," Sarah reached out and took his hand. "What are you thinking?" James turned to look at his wife. They had been married for 17 years, had weathered deployments and injuries, and the constant fear that one day he wouldn't come home. They had tried to have children of their own, but after years of trying and 2 miscarriages, they had accepted that it wasn't meant to be. The miscarriages had been the hardest thing either of them had ever faced, harder than deployments, harder than injuries. The first one had happened while James was overseas, and he hadn't even been there to hold Sarah's hand. The second had happened on a Tuesday afternoon, unexpected and devastating. They had grieved together, had considered adoption, had ultimately decided that maybe it wasn't meant to be. But now, looking into his wife's eyes, James saw something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. "I'm thinking," James said slowly, "that I made a promise. And I'm thinking that maybe there's a reason we couldn't have kids of our own." Sarah's eyes widened. "James, I know it's crazy. I know there's a million reasons why it wouldn't work. But I can't get her out of my head, Sarah. I close my eyes and I see her. I see those eyes, that look. She's alone in the world, and I told her I would come back for her. Adopting a child from a war zone isn't like picking up a stray dog. There's paperwork, legal issues, trauma. I know all that. But I also know that if I don't try, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "When I married you, I knew I was signing up for a life of uncertainty. I knew there would be deployments and danger, and nights when I wouldn't know if you were alive or dead. I accepted all of that because I loved you, because I believed in you." She turned to face him, her eyes shining with tears. "If you believe you can do this, if you believe you can bring this girl home and give her the life she deserves, then I believe in you too. We'll figure it out together, whatever it takes." "Then we try," she said. "Together." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." "Always," she said. "That's what partners do." The process was a nightmare. International adoption was complicated under the best circumstances, and adopting a child from an active conflict zone was something else entirely. There were mountains of paperwork, endless interviews, home visits, background checks. James had to navigate the bureaucracies of two governments, neither of which seemed particularly interested in making the process easy. The first step was finding a reputable adoption agency that worked with Afghan children. Most agencies had suspended operations in the country due to the ongoing conflict, but James eventually found one. A small non-profit based in Washington, D.C. that specialized in what they called impossible cases. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Harrison," the agency director, a woman named Patricia Wolf, had told him during their first meeting. "What you're trying to do is incredibly difficult. The Afghan government doesn't have a functioning adoption system. The U.S. government is reluctant to fast-track cases from conflict zones, and the child you're trying to adopt has no documentation whatsoever. No birth certificate, no family records, nothing." "I don't care how difficult it is," James had replied. "Tell me what I need to do." Patricia had studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "I can see why you were a SEAL, Mr. Harrison. You don't take no for an answer, do you?" "Never." "Good. You're going to need that attitude." The paperwork alone took 6 months. Home studies, background checks, financial disclosures, medical examinations, psychological evaluations. James and Sarah opened every aspect of their lives to scrutiny, answered every question, provided every document. They jumped through hoops that seemed designed to make them give up. But James was nothing if not persistent. The same determination that had carried him through BUD/S training, through countless missions, through 17 years of service, he channeled all of it into this one goal. Every rejection letter was met with an appeal. Every closed door was met with another knock. He learned the ins and outs of immigration law, spent hours on the phone with embassy officials, flew to Washington, D.C. multiple times to meet with senators and representatives who might be able to help. He called in every favor he had ever earned, reached out to every contact in his network. Months turned into a year, then 2. James retired from the SEALs, unable to focus on missions when his mind was constantly thousands of miles away. He took a job as a security consultant, work that paid the bills but left him feeling empty. The worst part was the waiting. Weeks would go by without any updates, without any indication that the process was moving forward. James would lie awake at night, wondering if Amira was okay, if she remembered him, if she had given up hope. And through it all, he kept his promise. Every month, he sent letters to the orphanage in Kabul. He didn't know if Amira received them, didn't know if she could even read, but he wrote anyway. He told her about Virginia Beach, about the ocean, about the dog he and Sarah had adopted, a golden retriever named Scout, who loved to chase seagulls on the beach. He told her about the room they had prepared for her, painted yellow because he remembered reading somewhere that yellow was a happy color. He sent photos, the house, the beach, Sarah smiling in the garden. He sent small gifts when he could get them through, a stuffed animal, a picture book, a warm sweater for the cold Afghan winters. He told her he hadn't forgotten, that he was still coming, that she just had to hold on a little longer. Sarah was his rock through all of it. When James wanted to give up, she reminded him why he had started. When he got discouraged by another rejection, she helped him draft the appeal. When he couldn't sleep, she sat with him on the porch, watching the stars and talking about the future they were fighting for. "What if it doesn't work?" James asked one night, during a particularly dark moment. They had just received another rejection letter, this one from the Afghan Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. "What if we've done all this for nothing?" Sarah took his hand. "Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we did everything we could." "That's not good enough. I made a promise. I know you did, and I know you'll keep it, because that's who you are, James. You don't give up. You never give up." He looked at her, at this woman who had stood by him through everything, who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. "I love you," he said. "I love you too. Now let's figure out our next move." "Mr. Harrison?" The voice on the other end of the phone was professional, detached. James had spoken to dozens of voices like this over the past 2 years. He expected more bad news. Yes? This is Margaret Chen from the International Refugee Assistance Project. I'm calling about your adoption case. Amira Nazari. James's heart stopped. Is she okay? She's fine. More than fine, actually. I'm calling because it's finally happening. Your paperwork has been approved, all of it. James couldn't speak, he couldn't breathe. Mr. Harrison, are you still there? I'm here, he managed. I'm saying you can bring her home. It's going to take about 6 weeks to finalize everything, but yes, she's going to be your daughter. James sat down heavily, his legs suddenly unable to support him. 2 years. 2 years of fighting, of hoping, of refusing to give up, and now... Thank you, he said, his voice cracking. Thank you so much. He hung up and immediately called Sarah. She answered on the first ring, as she always did when he called. James, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He was laughing now, tears streaming down his face. Nothing's wrong, Sarah. She's coming home. Our daughter is coming home. 6 weeks later, James stood in the arrivals terminal at Norfolk International Airport, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers that suddenly seemed ridiculous. What did an 8-year-old girl who had survived war care about flowers? Sarah stood beside him, equally nervous, smoothing her dress for the 100th time. They had both gotten new clothes for the occasion, as if meeting their daughter for the first time required formal attire. It felt silly and important all at once. The terminal was busy, the usual bustle of travelers coming and going. A family reunion was happening a few gates down, grandparents embracing grandchildren, tears of joy flowing freely. James watched them and wondered if that's what this would look like. He hoped so. He feared otherwise. What if she doesn't remember me? James asked. It's been over 2 years. She was so young. She'll remember, Sarah said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. What if she's scared of us? What if she doesn't want to come home with us? Then we'll take it slow. We'll give her time. We'll show her that we're safe, that we love her, that we're not going anywhere. James nodded, but his heart was racing. He had faced down armed combatants without flinching. He had jumped out of helicopters into hostile territory without hesitation. But standing in this airport, waiting for a little girl, he was more terrified than he had ever been. Flight 447 from Frankfurt has arrived, announced the overhead speakers. Passengers will be arriving at Gate 12. James's mouth went dry. Frankfurt was the layover point for flights from Kabul. This was it. The minutes that followed were the longest of his life. Passengers began streaming through the doors, business travelers, families, students. James scanned each face, searching for the one that haunted his dreams. And then, walking beside a social worker wearing an official-looking badge, came a small figure with dark hair and honey-colored eyes. She was taller than James remembered. Thinner, too. She was wearing a coat that was slightly too big for her, one of the ones he had sent, he realized with a pang. And she clutched a small backpack to her chest like a shield. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching, uncertain. And then she saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. 2 years of letters, 2 years of waiting, 2 years of holding on to a promise, all of it collapsed into this single moment. The noise of the airport seemed to fade away, the crowds disappeared, and it was just the two of them, connected by a bond forged in dust and desperation. Amira let go of the social worker's hand and ran. James dropped the flowers and caught her in his arms, lifting her off the ground, holding her tight against his chest. She was crying, the first time he had ever seen her cry, and she was saying something in a mix of English and Dari that he couldn't fully understand, but he understood enough. He understood you came back and you promised and I waited. He understood the weight of her small body in his arms, the warmth of her tears on his neck, the fierce grip of her fingers on his shirt. I'm here, he said, his own tears falling freely. I'm here, Amira. I told you I would come back. I told you I would keep you safe. She pulled back and looked at him, really looked at him, her small hands on either side of his face. The same gesture she had made 2 years ago in a dusty storage building half a world away. She was checking, confirming, making sure he was real. "You remember," she said, wonder in her voice. "You remember me." "I never forgot," James said. "Not for one single day." "The letters," she said. "I read them, every one. A lady at the orphanage helped me. I learned to read because of your letters." James laughed, the sound coming out choked with emotion. "You learned to read, so I could understand what you wrote, so I would know you were coming." "Father?" she asked, the word uncertain, hopeful. James nodded, unable to speak. "Father," she said again, this time not a question. And she smiled, a real smile, the first he had ever seen on her face. Sarah approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on the moment. But Amira noticed her and looked at James questioningly. "This is Sarah," James said, his voice thick. "She's going to be your mother. She's been waiting for you too. She helped me fight to bring you home." Amira looked at Sarah with those assessing eyes, the eyes that had seen too much. Sarah was crying too, mascara running down her cheeks, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. "You are pretty," Amira said finally in careful English, "like the pictures." Sarah laughed through her tears. "And you are beautiful. More beautiful than any picture could show." Amira reached out and took Sarah's hand. "Mother?" she said, testing the word. Sarah burst into tears and knelt down to embrace her. And there, in the middle of a crowded airport terminal, a family was born. 3 people from different worlds, brought together by war and love and a promise that refused to be broken. The first few months were hard. Harder than James had anticipated, and he had anticipated a lot. Amira didn't speak much at first. She would go hours without saying a word, retreating into herself, disappearing behind those honey-colored eyes. When she did speak, it was often in Dari, words that James didn't understand, but that sounded like fragments of memories, pieces of a past she couldn't quite let go of. She hoarded food, hiding crackers and fruit in her room, under her pillow, in the pockets of her coat. James found a stash of granola bars under her mattress one day, enough to last for weeks. When he asked her about it, she looked terrified, as if she expected to be punished. "I'm not mad," James said quickly. "I just want to understand." Amira was quiet for a long moment. Then in a small voice, "In the orphanage, sometimes there wasn't enough food. The big kids would take from the little kids. I learned to hide things, to save things, for when there was nothing." James felt his heart break all over again. "Amira, you never have to worry about food here. There will always be enough, I promise." But promises, he learned, were not enough. Not for a child who had learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that safety was an illusion, that the world was a place of constant danger. Amira had to learn to trust through experience, through day after day of consistency and care. She woke screaming from nightmares she couldn't or wouldn't describe. Sometimes it was the same nightmare. She was back in the storage building and the soldiers never came, and she waited and waited until she turned into a skeleton. Other times it was worse, dreams of fire and blood and the faces of people she had lost. James would go to her room and sit with her until the terror passed. He never asked questions, never pushed her to talk. He just sat there, a steady presence in the darkness, until her breathing slowed and her eyes grew heavy. "You're safe," he would say. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." After a while, she started to believe him. She flinched at loud noises, at sudden movements, at the sound of helicopters passing overhead. The 4th of July was a disaster. The fireworks sent her into a panic attack, and James spent hours holding her while she shook and cried. After that, they celebrated the holiday at home, with sparklers and hot dogs, the curtains drawn against the sky. But slowly, day by day, things began to change. Sarah, with her infinite patience and her nursing background, taught Amira to trust that food would always be there, that she didn't need to hide it. They made a ritual of grocery shopping together, Amira helping to fill the cart, seeing firsthand that the refrigerator would always be full. James taught her to swim in the ocean, to ride a bike, to throw a football. He taught her the constellations, pointing out the stars on clear nights, telling her stories about ancient heroes who had been transformed into points of light. He taught her that the world, despite its cruelty, could also be beautiful. They hired a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, who met with Amira twice a week. Amira was resistant at first, unwilling to open up, but gradually she began to talk. About the village, about her grandmother, about the day everything changed. The therapy was hard. There were sessions when Amira came home exhausted and withdrawn, sessions when she seemed to take 3 steps backward for every 1 step forward. But Dr. Chen assured them that this was normal, that healing from trauma was not a straight line, that there would be setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. The yellow room became truly Amira's. She decorated it with drawings, some dark and troubling, others bright with hope. She pinned up photos of the beach, of Scout the dog, of her new life. She learned English with remarkable speed, devouring books like they were oxygen. She started school and made friends, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Her first friend was a girl named Maya, a quiet child who also seemed to carry secrets. They bonded over their shared love of books and their shared experience of being different from the other kids. Maya didn't ask questions about Amira's past, and Amira didn't offer explanations. They just accepted each other, no explanations needed. And every night, before bed, Amira would find James and say the same thing. "You kept your promise." "Always," he would answer. "I will always keep my promises to you." One evening, about 6 months after Amira's arrival, she asked to talk to James alone. They sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the ocean, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "Father," she said. She had started calling him that regularly now, though sometimes she still slipped into Dari. "Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you come for me? Out of all the children in Afghanistan, all the orphans, all the ones who needed help, why me?" James thought about the question. He had thought about it a lot, actually. What was it about this one child that had captured his heart so completely? "I don't know," he admitted. "I've thought about it a lot. I think when I saw you hiding in that building, when I looked into your eyes, I saw something that told me you were meant to be mine, that we were meant to find each other. Like fate? Maybe. Or maybe it was just luck. But whatever it was, I'm grateful for it. Because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, Amira. You and your mother. You're my family. My whole world." Amira was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm grateful too," she said. "For you. For this life. For the promise you kept." They sat there until the stars came out, father and daughter, connected by a bond that no amount of paperwork or bureaucracy could ever truly capture. A bond that transcended borders and language and culture. A bond that was, quite simply, love. Years passed. Amira grew from a silent, traumatized child into a bright, determined teenager. She joined the track team and discovered she could run, really run, as if all the pain of her past was fuel pushing her forward. She won her first race by 3 full seconds, and James had never been prouder. She excelled in school, particularly in languages and history. She spoke 4 languages fluently now, English, Dari, Pashto, and Spanish, and was teaching herself Arabic. Her teachers called her gifted. James called her determined. "She has a mind like a sponge," one teacher told him during a parent-teacher conference. "She absorbs everything, and she works harder than any student I've ever had." "She's had to work hard her whole life," James replied. "It's the only way she knows." Amira volunteered at a local refugee resettlement organization, helping other children who had been through what she had been through. She translated for families who didn't speak English, helped kids with their homework, and simply listened to those who needed to talk. She understood their fear, their confusion, their hope. She had lived it, but she never forgot where she came from, and she never stopped asking questions about her past. "Dad," she said one evening, when she was 16. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained since her first week in Virginia Beach. The tradition had become sacred to both of them, a time to talk, to connect, to be together without distractions. "Yes, sweetheart, I want to go back, to Afghanistan. I want to see where I came from." James had been expecting this. He had dreaded it and prepared for it in equal measure. He knew that someday Amira would need to confront her past, to see with her own eyes the place where her story had begun. He just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "That's not a simple thing, Amira. It's dangerous. And the village where I found you, sir, there's nothing left." "I know. I've seen the satellite images. But I still need to go. I need to understand." She turned to look at him, and he saw in her eyes the same determination he had seen in the mirror every day of his SEAL career. "I need to close that chapter. Can you understand that?" He could, better than she knew. "Let me see what I can arrange," he said, "but not alone. If we do this, we do it together. I wouldn't have it any other way." Planning the trip took months. Afghanistan was not a safe place for tourists, and returning with an adopted child to the region where her family had been killed required careful coordination with the military, the State Department, and local authorities. 6 months later, they stood in the remnants of Amira's village. It was barely recognizable. The buildings had crumbled further, vegetation had begun to reclaim the streets, and the storage building where James had found her was nothing but a foundation. The journey to get here had been exhausting. They had flown into Kabul, spent 2 days navigating checkpoints and security protocols, then traveled by armored convoy to the region where Amira had been born. James had called in every favor he had, arranged for military escorts, coordinated with local tribal leaders. He wasn't taking any chances with his daughter's safety. The landscape was both beautiful and brutal. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks dusted with snow. The sky was a brilliant blue, unmarred by clouds. But the scars of war were everywhere. Burned-out vehicles by the roadside, buildings pockmarked with bullet holes, fields that had been cleared of mines but still bore the warning signs. Amira was quiet during the journey, her face pressed against the window, her eyes taking in everything. James watched her, trying to read her emotions, but her expression was unreadable. She had learned early how to hide what she was feeling. It was a survival skill that had served her well, but it also made moments like this difficult to navigate. When they finally arrived at the village, James asked the escort to wait at a distance. This was something Amira needed to do on her own terms, at her own pace. Amira walked through the ruins slowly, touching stones, closing her eyes, remembering. James followed at a distance, giving her space, but ready to catch her if she fell. He remembered this place differently, chaotic, dangerous, filled with the sound of gunfire and the smell of smoke. Now it was silent, peaceful in a way that felt almost wrong. "I remember this," she said, stopping in front of what had once been a house. The walls had collapsed, but the foundation remained, along with a few scattered possessions, a broken pot, a piece of fabric bleached by the sun, a child's sandal. "This was my grandmother's house. She made the best bread in the village. She used to let me help her knead the dough." James said nothing. He just listened. "She had these hands," Amira continued, her voice distant, lost in memory. "Strong hands, but gentle too. She would braid my hair every morning, tell me stories about the old days, before the wars. She believed things would get better. She believed I would grow up in a peaceful world." She picked up the child's sandal, turning it over in her hands. "This was mine. I remember losing it the day before. Before everything happened, I was so upset. My grandmother promised to make me new ones." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. James moved closer, putting a hand on her shoulder. "And here," she moved to another pile of rubble, "this was the school. I only went for a few months before everything happened. But I loved it. I loved learning. The teacher, Mr. Ahmadi, used to say I was the smartest student he'd ever had. He said I could be anything I wanted to be. He was right, James said softly. Amira nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. You and Mom made sure of that. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady. They're all gone. Everyone I knew before you. My parents, my grandmother, my teacher, all gone. This place, it's just rubble now, just memories. I know, sweetheart, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. She walked toward him and took his hand. You couldn't have saved them, but you saved me. And I've spent so many years wondering why me? Why did I survive when everyone else died? Amira. I know now, she continued. I survived because you came, because you made a promise and you kept it. I survived so I could have a new life, a new family, so I could help other kids like me. That's why. She hugged him then, and James held his daughter, and felt the weight of 15 years of love and fear and hope settle into something like peace. Thank you for bringing me here, she said. I needed to say goodbye. I needed to let them go. Are you okay? She pulled back and looked at him, really looked at him. I'm better than okay. I'm finally free. They spent another hour in the village. Amira collected a few stones, small pieces of the place that had made her. She said a prayer over the rubble of her grandmother's house, words in Dari that James didn't understand, but that sounded like both grief and gratitude. Before they left, she asked James to take her to the storage building, or what remained of it. This is where you found me, she said, standing on the foundation. This is where my old life ended and my new life began. You were so small, James remembered, so scared, but so brave too. You didn't scream, you didn't cry. You just watched me with those eyes, waiting to see what would happen. I thought you were an angel, Amira admitted. That's what my grandmother always said about soldiers. She said some of them were angels in disguise, sent to protect the innocent. I'm no angel. You are to me. They stood there together, father and daughter, on the spot where their story had begun. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment the ruined village looked almost beautiful. Ready to go home? James asked. Amira nodded. Ready? As they walked back to the convoy, Amira slipped her hand into James's. It was a gesture so simple, so trusting, that it took his breath away. Dad? Yeah? Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for giving me someone to keep it for. When Amira turned 18, she announced that she was joining the military. Not as a SEAL, that path wasn't open to her yet, but as an army translator. Her language skills, her understanding of the region, her personal history, they were all assets she wanted to use. James was terrified. After everything he had done to keep her safe, the thought of her walking into the same dangers he had faced was almost more than he could bear. He had seen what war did to people, had lived it, breathed it, been shaped by it. The idea of his daughter experiencing that same reality made him physically ill. You don't have to do this, he told her, the night she shared her plans. They were sitting on the porch again, their sacred space, the stars bright overhead. There are other ways to help, other ways to use your skills. I know, Amira said, but this is what I'm meant to do. This is how I can give back, how I can honor everyone who died in my village. Everyone who didn't get a second chance like I did. It's dangerous. You could be killed. So could you every time you deployed, but you did it anyway, because you believed in something bigger than yourself. That's what you taught me, Dad. That's who you raised me to be. James didn't have an argument for that. She was right. She was absolutely right, and he hated it. What does your mother say? She's scared too, but she understands. She said... Amira paused, smiling slightly. She said she learned a long time ago that loving someone means letting them become who they're meant to be, even when it terrifies you. James laughed, despite himself. She's always been smarter than me. I know. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, James spoke. If you're determined to do this, and I can see that you are, then I need you to make me a promise. Anything, Come home to us. Whatever happens, whatever you face out there, you come home. Do whatever it takes. Call in every favor, break every rule, move heaven and earth, but you come home. Amira reached over and took his hand, the same hand that had reached out to her in that storage building so many years ago. I promise, she said. I learned from the best. But Sarah reminded him of something important. You raised her to be brave, she said. You can't be surprised when she acts like it. So James did what he had always done. He supported her. He wrote her letters during her training, just like he had written to her in the orphanage. He sent care packages filled with her favorite snacks, books she'd been wanting to read, photos of home. He called her every Sunday, no matter what time zone he was in or what she was doing. He flew to her graduation, tears in his eyes, watching his daughter stand tall in uniform. She looked so much like him in that moment, the straight spine, the determined jaw, the eyes that had seen too much but still held hope. I'm so proud of you, he told her after the ceremony, hugging her tight. So incredibly proud. I couldn't have done it without you, she replied. Without everything you taught me. And when she shipped out for her first deployment, to Afghanistan, of course, because the universe had a sense of irony, he stood at the airport and renewed the promise he had made. Come home to us, he said. Whatever happens, you come home. I will, she said. I learned from the best. 3 tours. 3 tours she served, working as a translator, helping American forces communicate with local populations, helping children who reminded her of herself. She was good at it, better than good. She received commendations, promotions, praise from commanding officers, but what James was proudest of wasn't the medals or the recognition. It was what she did in the quiet moments, away from official channels. She started a non-profit organization that helped children orphaned by conflict find families in the United States. She used her story, her platform, to advocate for changes in international adoption laws. She testified before Congress about the importance of keeping promises to the most vulnerable. These children are not problems to be processed, she said in her testimony, her voice strong and clear. They are human beings deserving of love, of family, of a chance at life. For every child we save, we create ripples of hope that extend for generations. For every promise we keep, we prove that the world can be better than it is. By the time she was 30, she had helped place over 500 children with loving families, 500 promises kept, 500 lives changed. And it all started with one promise, made in a dusty storage building by a Navy SEAL who saw something worth saving in a pair of honey-colored eyes. James was 62 when he got the call. He was sitting on the porch of his Virginia Beach home, the same porch where he had sat with Amira countless times, watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. Sarah was inside making dinner. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm of grandchildren and holidays and quiet moments. Dad. Amira's voice was different, thick with emotion. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Dad, I found her. James's heart skipped. Found who? A girl. In a village near where you found me. She's 7 years old. Her family was killed in an attack. She was hiding in a storage shed, Dad. A storage shed. Just like me. James closed his eyes, and he was back there, the dust, the heat, the smell of smoke, and a pair of honey-colored eyes watching him from the shadows. What's her name? Layla. What are you going to do? There was a pause. Then, I made her a promise. I told her I would come back for her. I told her I would keep her safe. James felt tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling. That's my girl. The adoption process was still complicated, but Amira had learned from the best. She navigated the bureaucracy with the same determination James had shown 25 years earlier. She fought for every piece of paperwork, every signature, every approval. And 6 months later, she stood in an airport terminal, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers, waiting for a small girl with dark hair and frightened eyes to walk through the doors. When Layla saw her, she hesitated, just for a moment, and then she ran. James watched from a distance as his daughter caught the child in her arms, as history repeated itself in the most beautiful way possible. He watched as Amira whispered to Layla the same words he had whispered to her so many years ago. "I'm here. I came back. I will keep you safe." And he knew in that moment that this was his legacy, not the missions, not the medals, not the years of service. This chain of love and promises stretching from one generation to the next. He had kept his promise. And now his daughter was keeping hers. That Thanksgiving, 3 generations gathered around the table in the Virginia beach house. James and Sarah at the heads, their hair grey now, but their eyes still bright. Amira and her husband David, who had waited patiently through 3 deployments and loved her through all of it. And Layla, 8 years old now, learning English, learning to trust, learning that families could be chosen as much as born. The table was laden with food, turkey and stuffing and all the traditional fixings, but also dishes that reflected their diverse family history. There was Afghan rice pilaf, made from a recipe that Amira's grandmother had taught her. There was Korean kimchi, a favorite of David's from his time stationed in Seoul. There was Sarah's famous sweet potato casserole, passed down through 3 generations of Virginia women. Scout the dog, now old and grey himself, lay under the table hoping for scraps. The house smelled like cinnamon and sage and love. "Before we eat," James said, "I want to say something." The table fell silent, all eyes on him. The candlelight flickered, casting warm shadows on the walls filled with photographs of missions and deployments, of weddings and birthdays, of children growing up and promises being kept. 25 years ago, I walked into a destroyed village and found a little girl hiding in the shadows. I made her a promise that day, that I would come back for her, that I would keep her safe. I didn't know then that keeping that promise would become the most important thing I ever did." He looked at Amira, who was already crying. "Amira, you taught me that the best thing a person can do in this world is keep their promises, especially the ones that seem impossible, especially the ones that matter most." He turned to Layla, who was watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. "And Layla, I want you to know that you are part of this family now, part of this chain of promises. We will never give up on you. We will never stop fighting for you. That is our promise." Layla didn't fully understand all the words, but she understood enough. She understood the word promise and the word family and the way everyone was looking at her with love. "Promise?" she asked, her English still uncertain. "Promise," James confirmed. She nodded solemnly. "I stay. You stay. Forever." And for the first time since arriving in America, Layla smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and uncertain, but it was real. It was the first crack in the armor she had built around herself, the first sign that she was beginning to believe. Sarah reached over and took James's hand, squeezing it tight. Amira wiped her eyes and smiled at her father. David bowed his head in silent gratitude, and Layla, the newest member of the Harrison family, picked up her fork and began to eat. Outside, the sun was setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The waves crashed gently against the shore. The world turned on, indifferent to the small miracles happening inside this house. But to the people gathered around that table, this moment was everything. This was what they had fought for. This was what they had sacrificed for. This was the reward for every promise kept, every obstacle overcome, every dark night when giving up had seemed like the only option. They had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would ripple outward for generations, touching lives they would never know, changing the world in ways they couldn't imagine. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the guests had gone to bed, James sat on the porch one more time. The night was cold, but he didn't mind. He liked the quiet, the darkness, the sense of peace that had settled over his life. Amira came out and sat beside him, just like she had done 1,000 times before. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For keeping your promise. For showing me what it means to never give up on someone." James reached over and took her hand. Thank you for giving me something worth never giving up on." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "Dad? Yeah? Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" James thought about the question. He thought about the years of fighting the bureaucracy, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. He thought about the missions he had run, the friends he had lost, the scars he carried, both visible and invisible. "Not for a second," he said. "Not one single second." Amira leaned her head on his shoulder, just like she had done when she was 8 years old, and still learning what it meant to be loved. "I want to tell Layla's story," she said. "When she's ready, I want to write a book about all of it, about you and me and every child who's been saved by a promise." "That's a good idea. I want people to know that it's possible, that one person can make a difference, that keeping your word, even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible, that's how you change the world." James smiled. "You've already changed the world, sweetheart. More than you know. I learned from the best." They watched the stars a little longer. Somewhere inside the house, Layla was sleeping peacefully for the first time since arriving in America. Sarah was reading by the fire. David was doing the dishes, humming a song off-key. This was home. This was family. This was the life James had built, one promise at a time. "Hey, Dad? Yeah? I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. To the moon and back." Amira laughed, a full, bright laugh that still sounded like a miracle to James's ears. "To the stars and beyond," she finished. And somewhere in the darkness, among the countless stars scattered across the infinite sky, James could almost believe that every promise ever kept was shining down on them, a constellation of hope and love and second chances. He had been a Navy SEAL. He had served his country for 17 years. He had earned medals and commendations and the respect of his peers. But none of that mattered as much as this moment, right here, with his daughter by his side and a new granddaughter sleeping safely under his roof. This was his legacy. This was his purpose. This was what he was always meant to do: keep his promises, save the ones he could, love the ones he had, and never, ever give up. 5 years passed, and Layla blossomed. The frightened, silent girl who had arrived at the airport clutching a backpack like armor transformed into a confident, curious 10-year-old who asked questions about everything. She loved science and soccer and the color purple. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at certain sounds, still hoarded snacks in her room, but she was healing. Day by day, moment by moment, she was learning what it meant to be safe. The transformation had not been easy. Like Amira before her, Layla carried the weight of trauma that no child should ever have to bear. She had witnessed things that would haunt her forever: the destruction of her village, the loss of everyone she had ever loved, the terrifying journey through a war zone to an orphanage that offered little comfort. But she had something that many children in her situation didn't have: a family who understood. Amira knew exactly what Layla was going through because she had been through it herself. She knew the nightmares, the fear, the desperate need to hoard food and hide in small spaces. She knew how long it took to learn to trust, to believe that safety wasn't just temporary. David, Amira's husband, had been patient beyond measure. A former army chaplain, he understood trauma in his own way. He had counseled soldiers returning from war, had helped families cope with loss, had witnessed the slow and painful process of healing. He brought that same patience and compassion to his role as Layla's father. James and Sarah, now in their late 60s, doted on their granddaughter with the kind of fierce, protective love that only grandparents can give. They took her to the beach, taught her to build sandcastles, bought her ice cream cones that dripped down her arms in the summer heat. They gave her the normalcy that every child deserves. Amira had kept her promise. Every single day, in ways large and small, she showed Layla that she was loved, that she belonged, that she would never be abandoned again. And Layla, in turn, had begun to understand the power of promises. "Mom," she said one afternoon, using the word she had finally started using after 2 years of hesitation. "Tell me the story again, about how Grandpa found you." They were sitting on the porch, the same porch where James had sat with Amira so many times, watching sunsets and talking about life. It had become a family tradition now, this porch, this ritual of connection. Amira smiled. It had become a ritual, this story. Layla asked for it at least once a week, as if she needed to hear it over and over to believe it was real. "It was a long time ago," Amira began, as she always did. "I was about your age. There was a war in my country, and my family was in danger. One day, bad things happened, very bad things, and I had to hide. In the storage building," Layla said, knowing this part by heart. "In the storage building. I was scared. I was alone. I didn't think anyone would ever find me. But then Grandpa came. Grandpa came. He was a soldier, a very brave soldier, and he found me hiding in the shadows. He gave me water and food, and he told me something I never forgot. He promised," Layla whispered. "He promised. He said he would come back for me. He said he would keep me safe. And you know what? He did. It took a long time, years and years. But he never gave up. He kept fighting until I could come home with him." Layla was quiet for a moment, processing the story as she always did. Then she asked a question she had never asked before. "Mom, will you ever break a promise to me?" Amira knelt down so she was at eye level with her daughter. "No, Layla, never. I will never break a promise to you. Do you know why?" Layla shook her head. "Because Grandpa taught me that promises are the most important things in the world, more important than money or power or anything else. When you make a promise, you're giving someone a piece of your heart, and you never ever take that back." Layla thought about this. Then she nodded solemnly. "I won't break promises either," she said. "I promise." Amira laughed and hugged her tight. "That's my girl." James was 70 when they held the ceremony. The auditorium was packed with people. Veterans, politicians, journalists, and most importantly, children. Hundreds of children from all over the world, all of them brought to America through the organization Amira had founded. The Harrison Promise Foundation, she had called it, in honor of the man who had started it all. James sat in the front row, Sarah beside him watching as his daughter took the stage. She was 45 now, her dark hair streaked with gray, but those honey-colored eyes were as bright as ever. 20 years ago, Amira began, I stood in an airport and watched a little girl run into my arms. That girl's name was Layla. She was 7 years old, orphaned by war, and she had no one left in the world. I made her a promise that day, the same promise my father made to me 25 years before that. I told her I would keep her safe. I told her I would never give up. She paused, looking out at the audience. Today, Layla is 22 years old. She graduated from college last spring with honors. She's currently in medical school, training to become a pediatric surgeon. She wants to spend her life saving children, because she knows what it means to be a child who needs saving. The audience erupted in applause. In the front row, Layla was crying. But this ceremony isn't about Layla, Amira continued, and it isn't about me. It's about the man who started all of this. The man who walked into a destroyed village 30 years ago and saw a scared little girl hiding in the shadows. The man who made a promise he had no idea how to keep, and then spent years fighting to keep it anyway. She turned to look at James. Dad, can you come up here? James stood slowly, his joints protesting after decades of hard use. Sarah squeezed his hand as he walked toward the stage, each step feeling both endless and too short. When he reached Amira, she took his hands in hers. You taught me that promises matter, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You taught me that one person can make a difference. You taught me that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, it all started with you, with a promise you made to a scared little girl in a storage building. She turned to the audience. I'd like to present my father, James Harrison, with the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Harrison Promise Foundation. Not for his years of military service, though those were extraordinary. Not for his work as an advocate for refugee children, though that has changed countless lives, but for the simplest, most powerful thing he ever did, keeping his word. She placed a medal around his neck, not a military medal, but something more personal. It was shaped like a golden trident, the symbol of the Navy SEALs, but inscribed on the back were the words, "A promise kept." James looked at the medal, then at his daughter, then at the audience full of children whose lives had been changed by the chain reaction of one promise made 30 years ago. He stepped up to the microphone. "I'm not a man of many words," he said. "I spent my career letting my actions speak for me, but I want to say something today, especially to the young people in this room." He looked out at the sea of faces, children from Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, Honduras, Somalia, and a dozen other countries, children who had known war and loss and fear, children who had been saved by promises. "A promise is a sacred thing," he said. "When you give your word, you're giving a piece of yourself, and that means you have to be careful about what you promise. But it also means that when you do make a promise, you have to keep it. No matter how hard, no matter how long, no matter what obstacles stand in your way." He paused, gathering himself. 30 years ago, I made a promise to a little girl. I had no idea if I could keep it. I didn't know how or when or if it was even possible, but I knew that I had to try, because she was worth it, because every child is worth it. He looked at Amira, at Layla, at Sarah. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who kept his word. And if I can do it, so can you. Every single one of you. You can make promises. You can keep them. You can change the world, one promise at a time." The audience rose to its feet, applauding. James stood there, overwhelmed, as his family joined him on stage. Sarah took his hand. Amira wrapped her arms around him. Layla, now a young woman with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's smile, placed her hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," Amira whispered. "For everything." "Thank you," he whispered back, "for giving me something worth fighting for." They stood there together, 3 generations of a family built not on blood, but on love, not on circumstance, but on choice, not on luck, but on promise. And in the audience, hundreds of children watched, learning the lesson that would shape the rest of their lives. Promises matter. Love endures. And one person, one choice, one commitment can change everything. That night, after the ceremony, after the congratulations and the photographs and the endless stream of grateful parents and hopeful children, James sat on his porch one last time. The stars were out, brilliant and endless, the same stars he had watched on countless nights over the past 30 years. The same stars that had witnessed his promise, his struggle, his triumph. Sarah came out and sat beside him, as she had done for 50 years of marriage. They didn't need to speak. They knew each other too well for words. Inside the house, Amira and David were putting the grandchildren to bed. Layla was in the kitchen, video chatting with her boyfriend. The sounds of family filled the air, laughter, conversation, the ordinary music of a life well lived. James closed his eyes and let it wash over him. He had been a warrior, a husband, a father, a grandfather, an advocate, a symbol. But more than any of that, he had been a man who kept his promises, and in the end, that was enough. More than enough. That was everything. "James?" Sarah's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Yeah? Do you remember what you told me the night you decided to adopt Amira? When I asked you why?" James smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I said that I made a promise, and that I was going to keep it no matter what." "And you did." Sarah took his hand. "You really did." "We did," James corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. We make a good team, the best." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said finally. "Proud of the man you are. Proud of the family we built. Proud of everything." "I'm proud of us," James said. "And I'm grateful. Every single day I'm grateful." The screen door opened, and Layla stepped out onto the porch. She was 22 now, a medical student, a survivor, a living testament to the power of kept promises. "Grandpa, can I sit with you?" "Always," James said, making room for her. She settled beside him, just as Amira had done so many times before. The parallels weren't lost on any of them. "Grandpa," Layla said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "When I finish medical school, I want to work with refugees, with children. I want to be like Mom and like you. I want to make promises and keep them." James felt his heart swell with pride and love and hope. "That sounds like a wonderful plan," he said. "But I'm scared," Layla admitted. "What if I can't do it? What if I make promises I can't keep?" James was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Layla, let me tell you something. When I walked into that village 30 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing. I was a soldier, not a social worker. I didn't know anything about adoption or international law or childhood trauma. All I knew was that there was a little girl who needed help, and I was the one who found her." He looked at her, his granddaughter, the living proof of promises kept. "You don't have to know how you're going to keep a promise when you make it. You just have to know that you're going to try, that you're not going to give up, that no matter how hard it gets, you're going to keep fighting. Because that's what promises are. They're not guarantees, they're commitments. They're saying, 'I will do everything in my power to make this happen.'" Layla nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "And you know what?" James continued. "You come from a long line of promise keepers. Your mother kept her promise to you. I kept my promise to her, and now it's your turn. Your turn to make promises, to keep them, to pass them on to the next generation." "The chain continues," Layla said softly. "The chain continues," James confirmed. "And it will never break. Not as long as there are people like you who believe in the power of a promise." Layla leaned over and kissed his cheek. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, sweetheart. To the moon and back. To the stars and beyond," she finished. And somewhere in the infinite darkness above them, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the power of promises kept and lives transformed. James Harrison closed his eyes and smiled. He had done what he set out to do. He had kept his promise. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the medals or the missions or the years of service, not the titles or the honors or the speeches, just the promise, the simple, impossible, world-changing promise, made to a scared little girl in a storage building, kept against all odds, passed on to the next generation, and the next, forever.